We're going to get started. Good morning and welcome. We're going to change one last business card and then. Okay. We have a packed and exciting agenda for our meeting today. Some of the highlights include 3 new business members that we will introduce. We're going to have preliminary results from the survey of the Workforce One customers on independent orthopedic workers. And lastly, we'll hear from Deputy Mayor Bill Thompson, which is a real treat for us today. I also want to acknowledge Bill Tong, Commissioner of the New York City Department of Youth and Community Development. He's here with us today, and we really appreciate it. So thank you for joining us today. Okay, before we get into the substance of the meeting, I believe we have a quorum. So we have our meeting minutes from our December meeting, and the board needs to vote on those. We need to adopt the minutes, which can be found in section 1 of your board book. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes? Second? All in favor? Okay, approved. Thank you. So as most of you know, the Workforce Development Board staff are part of the Mayor's Office of Workforce Development, and we wanted to acknowledge the departure of Stacy Evans, Literacy Advisor at the Mayor's Office for Workforce Development. Stacy has been deeply involved behind the scenes in the board's staff review of WIOA's Title II, which relates to adult education. And she's moving on to CUNY, where she will serve as the University Director of Language and Literacy Programs. We wish her all the success in her new role. So thank you, Stacy. She's not here.
She left.
Yeah. So she's gone, yes. Okay. We'd also like to welcome our 3 new board members. You can see their full bios in the board book in section 2. First we have David Belosky, right here. Mr. Belosky is the founder and CEO of Uncommon Goods. In 1999, Dave founded Uncommon Goods, a pioneering website for handmade and independently designed products. Uncommon Goods became a founding B Corporation in 2007, reflecting a focus on delivering a positive social and environmental impact in addition to generating profits. The company is independently owned and has taken a slow money approach to its business. It has grown gradually, provides stock options to all of its 200-plus year-round team members, runs the business, including the warehouse and call center, under one roof in Sunset Park, and pays a starting wage of over $15 for seasonal workers, and of course year-round workers earn even more. David's been actively involved in successful legislation to provide New Yorkers with paid leave and a higher minimum wage. These practices contributed to Uncommon Goods being named 2018 Forbes Small Giant, and Dave being named Business Champion of Family Values at Work. So please join me in welcoming David Belosky to the New York City Workforce Development. Second, we have Dr. Randall Pickett. Dr. Pickett is the founder, chairman, and CEO of BCT Partners. He's established himself as an entrepreneur, speaker, author, and scholar, and as a leading voice for his generation in business and technology. He is the founder, chairman, and CEO of his 5th venture, BCT Partners, a multi-million-dollar consulting, research, and technology and analytics firm headquartered in Newark, New Jersey. Dr. Pinkett has received numerous awards, including IT Senior Management Forum's Beacon Award, the National Society of Black Engineers Entrepreneur of the Year Award, the National Urban League's Business Excellence Award. He's been featured on nationally televised programs such as The Today Show, Fox Business News, MSNBC, and CNN. In 2009, he was named to New Jersey Governor John Corzine's official shortlist as a potential running mate for Lieutenant Governor in New Jersey. Dr. Pinkett was not able to attend today's meeting because he had a prior commitment, but he sends his regrets. And third, we have Audrey Powell. Morning. Ms. Powell is the President and CEO of Cooperative Home Care Associates. As President and CEO of Cooperative Home Care Associates, which I'll call CHCA, the largest employee-owned cooperative business in the country, Audrey is responsible for the oversight of more than 2,000 home care workers and over 100 administrative staff. CHCA is a 32-year-old licensed home care services agency, firmly anchored in the Bronx. Audrey joined the agency as a coordinator in 1993 and has since fulfilled progressively higher levels of responsibility. She leads the organization with the belief that investing in home care workforce will result in quality outcomes and higher customer satisfaction. Please join me in welcoming Audrey to the New York City Workforce. Okay, so we're now going to hear some updates on WIOA funding and the State Office of Workforce Development from Chris Neal. I will turn it over there.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
So for the first time in a few years, we have good news about our federal funding. The long and short of it is this year we're seeing an increase, a net increase of almost $5.5 million, which is great. And that is in WIOA, or the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. And because we have new members, just to sort of briefly go through what these categories are, we get some money for adults 18 and over, and that money is broken into two categories: dislocated workers, which are people who generally have been laid off and are unlikely to return to their same occupation. So we get a chunk of money to serve dislocated workers, and then all the rest of the adults can fall into this bucket. So this is the money that goes to the Department of Small Business Services. And then we have the youth money, which goes to the out-of-school youth or train and earn programs, and the in-school youth or learn and earn programs, and that goes to the Department of Youth and Community Development. So as you can see here, SBS is seeing a net increase of about $2.3 million in adult and dislocated worker funding, and UICD is seeing an increase of more than $3 million in this next year. Now, why did this happen? The federal funding for WIOA stayed exactly flat. No change from last year at all, exactly flat. And some of you will recall that funding is based on a formula. It's not political, it's just based on a formula that allocates money to all 50 states. And there are a number of different factors that are used in that calculation. And New York State actually did worse on some of those factors than it has in a while. Now, our unemployment rate is still, it's almost historically low, but compared to other states, I guess we were doing worse. So New York State saw an increase of almost 25% in its WIOA dollars. New York City saw, I think this is about 13% increase. So we are doing better relative to most other areas in the state, so our increase was less. But as an absolute number, $5.5 million in new money, back up to almost $60 million, we're thrilled. So this is very good news. Speaking of money, the other thing I wanted to mention is that there is a relatively new State Office of Workforce Development, which is now overseeing workforce development at the state level. A new director was appointed recently. Her name is Madhuri Kamareddy, and she was at the Clinton Foundation and BlackRock, I think. And so she's had a number of interesting positions in her background, and she's going to be a good ally for us, I think, at the state level. But the money piece is that she's also, one of the big charges of her office is to oversee a pool of about $175 million in workforce funding. And there is a number of different competitions that are now part of what some of you may be familiar with, which is the state's It's called the Consolidated Funding Application, or CFA, but it's generally the governor's approach to economic development. And the idea is you take a lot of different funding streams and a lot of grant competitions and sort of put them in one place. And workforce was always, a small piece of that, but now it's increased by a lot to $170 million. Sorry, $175 million. Relatedly, part of the process involves the local Regional Economic Development Council. Some of you may be familiar with that, some of you may not. New York City has its own Regional Economic Development Council. The governor essentially appoints the folks on that council, but they play a role in reviewing the applications. And this time around, they are putting a workforce development board director around the 10 regions, and so I'm serving on the committee that will be reviewing the proposals. So we'll have a voice in reviewing the proposals, and generally what we're looking for is, are they in line with the local economic development plan that the Regional Economic Development Council puts out, and are they in line with our board's local plan, which you may recall from a couple of years ago, we put out a 4-year plan, happy to share that with you all. But just know that our voice is represented on that committee, and we may apply for some grant funding, or city agencies may apply for some grant funding, and in cases where there is a real or chance for an appearance of a conflict of interest, I will of course recuse myself from those conversations. But it's really good news that the state is now really investing in workforce development in a big way. Any questions about any of these topics, Dave?
One quick one. I assume.
Would you mind turning on the mic? Sorry.
So, if this money is not spent, what happens?
If it's not spent, we have to give it back, but I don't think that's ever been a problem for us. And the money actually is 2-year money. So we have to spend generally about 80% of it in one fiscal year, but the rest of it rolls over into the next fiscal year. And so our budget is always a little bit of 2 different fiscal years mashed together. And we're going to have a new member orientation. We'll sort of get into some of these more arcane details of how this stuff works. But in my experience, we've never failed to spend our money because we know that we have to do it. We have deadlines, and we manage that pretty carefully. Yeah, I don't think we've ever given money back willingly.
And we drive the state's numbers, so that's why when they have money to give, they usually give it to New York City.
Yeah, I think we have maybe 40-45% of the state's entire budget. So we're population-wise and speed-wise, we're the big dog. Yeah, Taylor.
One of the things the new Office of State Workforce Development has talked about is streamlining the RFP application process across different state agencies. That's a little convoluted. It's challenging for them to kind of operate with best practices, get access to the best organizations doing the best work, and it's also very confusing for a lot of organizations that want to apply for the funding. I'm wondering if some of that has been part of the conversation, and if we could talk about bringing some of that conversation to New York sometime sooner than later.
I mean, we did hear from Madhuri, and I think she's open to any ideas about making it easier. I mean, she was really all about making it simpler, clearer, faster for businesses or organizations or governments to apply for that particular funding. So, but the second part of your question was, can we bring some of that to New York City? I didn't totally follow that.
Well, in addition to the RFP application process, there have been a lot of conversations behind the scenes about streamlining applications, but also the payment process in terms of organizations being paid on time, and how different agencies have different payment processes for organizations. And so from an accountability standpoint, sometimes it's hard for organizations to know where to go to have that conversation.
Right. So you're saying you want to see that applied in New York City as well?
We would love that conversation.
Okay. I mean, I think on the human services side, there definitely is a real push to make sure contracts are now registered on time and that there is less time waiting for nonprofits to start getting paid. So, yeah, we're happy to talk further. Any other questions on this point? Okay, great, thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Okay, so now we're going to have an update on our independent work survey of the Workforce One customers. The topic of gig workers has been a recurring one of interest for our board. And so the board has helped implement a second 2-week survey of Workforce One customers about the extent of their involvement in independent work or the gig economy. So I'm now going to turn it back over to Chris and to our Vice Chair, Mark Elliott, to provide an update on the survey.
So people probably remember the conversations we've had over the last several months about the board's interest in the gig economy. We, through CWE, invested some money in the census school. We've had folks do presentations. And at one, I think, executive committee meeting, I was kind of skeptical. I said, we should really find out how many gig workers are coming into our ones. And unfortunately, everyone thought that was a good idea. And I kind of volunteered my organization to design the survey and analyze the results. We implemented it, was it a year ago?
September.
Several, 9 months ago. And we didn't put a lot of time into the preparation, basically none, and rolled it out. And the Workforce One centers did their best completing it, and I think we got a 68% response rate, which was pretty decent for most research organizations. And the results look really interesting. We haven't really shared them fully here, but I certainly was surprised. There's a much higher share of people working in the gig economy coming, or as independent contractors, as we defined it in the survey, than I had expected to find. Most of the most credible research on the share of workers, in this part of the economy is somewhere between 6 and 10%. And so we at Mobility thought, well, these results are so surprising, we'd like to have a higher response rate on the surveys before we actually publish them, because we thought the credibility of the data would really come into question with a 68% response rate. It's not bad, but it's not great. So Mobility, SBS, and all the Workforce One centers really worked together to do a second round on the survey. We redesigned some questions, and Chris and Reynolds went out to each of the Workforce One centers and trained the staff and answered their questions about how to field the survey. And we just completed the last day of the surveys. We ran it for 10 business days. We just completed it yesterday. And we are happy to say this data on this chart is actually out of date. This was through, I think, Friday. Yeah. This is through Friday. So we're 1 day short, apologies. But as you can see, we fielded there were 1,500 customers who came into the Workforce One centers. We got 1,373 through Friday to respond, over 90% response rate, which in this work is absolutely stellar. And no one will be able to impugn the results from at least the quality of the survey. All right, I usually like to do this before. That's right, okay. So I just had my colleague Ann Rover's really done all the analytic work on this since I knew there was a board meeting, and everyone loved to hear about this. I'm sorry Joe McDermott is not here. He loves this stuff. Yes. He's been like, yeah. So you'll have to report back to him, Anthony, on these results. So you can read down the left. I'm not going to read all that, but among all customers who came into the Workforce One centers, 21% had reported doing independent work for pay in the last year. And among customers who had worked at all, almost a third reported doing some independent work for pay in the past year. This doesn't mean it was their main job or their only job, but certainly they are relying on independent work to supplement their income, if not rely on it entirely. These results, I think, will be viewed as very surprising by the sort of serious, there have been lots of anecdotal stories about how gig work is taking over the American economy. Folks who really believe that won't find these surprising, but the Department of Labor and two major economists, Larry Katz and Alan Kruger's work indicates that the share of workers working on an independent work is about 6 to 10%. So the idea that we're 3 to 5 times that is really stunning. I'm just going to do one more slide and then we'll do some questions. And then we asked the percent who reported earning money through mobile apps and websites. This was a particular interest. And you can see there that 8% of all customers and 12% of those who had worked in the last year were using apps to find their work. So even that is higher than the 6 to 10% that others have reported. So at the very least, I think the implications of this are a much higher share of people coming into the workforce one centers, i.e. the folks that federal public policy on job training and employment should be most concerned about. It's a much bigger factor than is being considered right now. There's nothing in WIOA that really accounts for this. You get no credit for placing somebody in independent work. And certainly when you're looking at state administrative data for earnings, none of these jobs are captured in the unemployment insurance data. So from a research standpoint, which obviously I care about, evaluations that focus simply on unemployment insurance data are missing a very large part of people's potential income. So anyway, I think these will get a lot of attention once we actually we'll start doing the analysis and write a brief, I think, over the summer. So, questions? Yeah.
The data, the 6 to 10%, does that include not, what's the word? When they don't tell the tax?
Under the table.
Yes.
To the extent people reported, in these surveys. The BLS the Department of Labor had a hell of a time with their survey. They really, we found this to some extent. 2 people would say, no, I'm not doing any of that work, and then they would say, oh yeah, but I drive for Uber. That's true on our survey to some extent, but we tried to take some of the issues BLS had into account.
Yeah.
So,
I feel like because when we talked about this last time, I think we talked about how the companies they don't report it on the other side.
No, they don't report it. There's nothing reported. That's what I'm saying. They have to report the unemployment insurance system when somebody's an employee, but they don't report it when they're an independent contractor.
And then, so is it all BLS data that you're talking about with the 6 to 10%?
No, it's Larry Katz and Alan Kruger first wrote a paper where they their basic conclusion was that the gig economy was much larger than they thought. And then they did a second paper, revisited it, and said, no, we were wrong. It's actually about 10%.
Okay.
So those
if
are
you
the
just
2.
count all the Uber drivers, is that not
What's that?
count for 10% of the?
I'm sorry?
I was just making a joke about how many Uber drivers there are.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's a really, our labor market information has not been built to capture this kind of work, right? So, I think, the fact that 6 to 10%, I think most people are not going to really worry about it. But if the folks who are engaging with the public sector are much more likely to be relying on independent contracting for, making ends meet, basically, however it's defined, then I think it's something that DOL and, we are the largest workforce board. We get the most money of any of the country, so I think they'll be very interested in these findings. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing this. It's fascinating information.
Still confidential. I saw you taking photographs.
No preliminary.
Keep it to myself and my executive director.
And Road would be
It won't go far.
mortified if somebody was sharing this before she cleaned the data.
No problem.
Or you realize this is all being videoed.
All right, turn that on.
2 quick questions. One, how many people participated in the survey?
That was in the beginning.
Yeah, it was like that.
It's,
1,500 through Friday, so it's probably, where's Reynolds?
Okay.
Reynolds has the
Followed
last.
at 1,700.
Yeah, so it's a big survey. That
Okay.
is a big survey.
And how willing were people to share this information? Did you anonymize the information?
Yes, it's all anonymized.
Okay, so you know that you have their contact information, or you didn't take their
We
contact?
do not have their contact information.
Okay, got it.
We're not at all concerned about following up with them, and we wanted to get the response rate as high as possible. I have to say the Workforce One Centers did an amazing job. I think there's one or two that have 100% response rate,
Yeah.
which is probably illegal, but.
Last one is paper
Because the
survey.
survey was voluntary.
Right, of
so-
course. Paper or digital in terms of.
Paper. We were planning on doing digital, but the Workforce One Centers, no, paper is much easier for us.
It just worked better with their process. It was more complicated to have to take people over to a computer lab where maybe other people were looking for jobs, and so it was just much easier for them to do paper. And then, so they said that they spent 20 to 30 minutes at the end of the day just entering it all into a SurveyMonkey survey we set up. So,
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, good morning. Curious, why only Upper Manhattan and not all of the borough?
well, that is the location of
With
the
the
big
center.
Manhattan. Yeah, these are all the big borough centers. So
Okay.
SPS has 18 centers throughout the 5 boroughs. Some of them are a lot smaller than most of them are smaller than these. These are all the big hub centers. So the one in Manhattan happens to be in Upper Manhattan, but it does serve all of Manhattan.
'Cause I would be curious to see Chinatown included in that, if it is, or I don't know, but is that something that people normally travel to a Workforce One?
Yeah, I mean,
Or
people,
would they come to, say, a Brooklyn one because it's closer?
The Brooklyn Hub Center on
Can you use the
Bond
mic?
Street, sorry.
no problem.
I don't want to look at a map, but I think the 90 Bond Street Brooklyn Hub Center might be easier to get to than Upper Manhattan.
But the truth is that, these centers, they bring people in because they have job opportunities.
Right.
And in some cases, training opportunities. So people are willing to travel. So if I see a job I like, I'm gonna go out to Queens even if I live in Chinatown.
Right.
So, we're just capturing the new customers coming in the doors in these centers, or people returning after more than 6 months of having service, so they're essentially considered them new customers. But they could be coming from anywhere in the cities, in each of these cities.
I'm going to be super interested in the results. Did you capture at all what the type of work is
We tried
that
to.
people were doing?
Yeah, we tried to. I mean, you should try designing one of these surveys to capture all of the work that they're doing. It's not easy. So we put in as many, we learned from the first survey, and we looked at what everybody else had done, and we tried to incorporate as much as we could, but there's still going to be some things people are doing that are outside.
And for people who were, had worked or were also working and looking to supplement their income, did you both capture people who were doing this kind of work to supplement their income, or what the motivation it was for people, and also what people's, some baseline on what people need?
Yeah, I think we'll know whether it's their main job. But we designed the survey so it could be completed in like 10 minutes. So this wasn't a telephone survey, this was a paper survey, so it had to be relatively simple. We don't have anything about their motivation or, What's interesting to me is so many people are working in that, have employment as independent contractors, but they're coming into the Workforce One Centers for help. Does that mean they want to get out of those jobs, or do they plan on continuing to, if they're working in them 10 hours a week, getting some other full-time job where they'll still supplement their income with independent work? I don't know.
Exactly,
But
I think
these
it's,
findings raise lots of interesting questions about what really is going on here, and, we went into this, being agnostic about whether independent contractor work was a good thing or not, right? There's a lot of people on, sort of partisan views of whether, big jobs are good jobs. We designed the survey to keep it as neutral as possible. But certainly there's nothing in WIOA that takes this into account. I bet other workforce boards around the country are going to be really interested in this.
yeah, so can't wait for more results and then kind of discussion of what the policy implications of this could be, because even though we're really excited that New York City is a $15 minimum wage city, it's still a super expensive place to live, and the cost of healthcare is just crazy. And so to the degree that people are looking to supplement because they're just not making enough, or they have a part-time job and looking for a full-time job and trying to find ways to piece together enough, be interesting to kind of see in a little more detail.
Yeah, I think at the next board meeting, we'll have a full presentation. Chris will give you a few minutes.
As many as you need, Mark.
Is there, so with the $50 minimum wage, is there any sort of data around what the actual, sort of hourly wages for the average worker? Does that make sense? That question makes sense?
Could you say that again?
What the actual hourly wages for workers in New York City?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's data on that. But I
Do
mean,
you mean gig workers, or do you mean?
Yeah, that sort of takes it to a greater, not what the technical, legal minimum wage is, but in practice. I'm just,
well, there's certainly data on what the average wage is in New York City,
okay.
but that's not what you're looking for, I don't think. You're talking about sort of at the entry level of the labor market.
Yeah, I guess
Yes.
so. Yeah, I guess especially with this in context,
Are you trying to get at, are people underpaid relative to the law?
Yeah, I think so.
Well, that's probably happening off the books, because if you're reporting your payrolls to the state, it would be pretty obvious if you're paying below $15 an hour, so that would be a no-no. And then there are certain types of jobs that can legally pay below minimum wage, right? Like in the restaurant industry, where there are commissions, tips in that industry, and then there are commissions in other industries, and there's a lower legal minimum wage, but people obviously supplement that with tips. So the actual minimum wage, that'll bring down the average sort of base earnings of the population.
But I think here, and this maybe is part of why you're asking this, when you're an independent contractor, you can be paid by the delivery, right? So your earnings depend on how busy you are through whatever mobile app you're using. And, it's not clear that you're always going to be making at least minimum wage, and that's what the whole Uber, Lyft, city council legislation was about, ensuring even if they're not getting rides, that they're getting paid. But there's lots of independent work outside of Uber and Lyft where there isn't that kind of focus.
Okay, any other questions? Thank you, Mark, that was really interesting. Okay, we'll now move to the WIOA adult programs, and Cindy Glover, the Deputy Commissioner of Workforce Development at the Department of SBS, is here to provide the update. Thank you. We've provided a new format for our report from this quarter going forward, all with the aim of making it a more accessible, quicker read for you. So we've included more data in a table format up the front. From page 4 onwards is a very brief description of each of the programs, so that then each quarter it's just the data table will be updated, and then a couple of pages just highlighting some of the key activities from the quarter. Some context for our performance this year. As the board is aware, we went through an RFP for the management of the Workforce One system last summer, with new contracts beginning in October, and that resulted in some uncertainty among the vendors who were managing the system in the first quarter of the fiscal year, and some change in which vendors were managing which centres, which also had an impact on the second quarter of the fiscal year because the contract started in October, and there were some staffing gaps in centres where that management has changed. So at the top of the performance snapshot, you'll see that we were able to keep the hires pretty stable when compared to where we were at a year ago. So I see that as a big success, given all of the changes that were going on in the system. think I've also flagged for you that we also had some key staffing gaps at SDS. So I started in October. There was about a 6-month gap between me and my predecessor. There were also vacancies in the Assistant Commissioner for Training and the Assistant Commissioner for Workforce One overseeing the system. So all of that makes delivering services really challenging. So you can see that we have currently an average wage of $15.42. Prior to the 1st of January, when the new minimum wage came in, we had an average of $15.06. So we've consistently been above the minimum wage. You'll see that for food service, we didn't have any activity this year. We will be starting a new line cook apprenticeship in the fall of FY20. In terms of training, the enrolments are consistent with what we achieved last year. Due to that gap in staffing, we had a slower start to FY19, but really picked up the pace towards the end of the year. So that has impacted the number of completions that we've seen, and as a flow-on consequence to that, the number of people getting a job. But we have been at a fast clip through the latter part of the year and expect to continue that pace through next year. So some of the highlights from the specific trainings we've had, and sorry, just before I go through these, in terms of the number of people who have been employed as a result of training, those numbers will continue to climb as we move through, and there's more time for people to have gotten a job after their graduation. So we've had 2 ESL bridge training programs, one in bilingual medical assistant, the other a bridge to the nursing license exam. We graduated the 5th cohort in medical billing. 23 out of 24 people are now employed with an average wage of $22.76. We've had 4 alumni of the Word Development Fellowship employed with an average salary of $75,600. We've recently contracted with Galvanize to run a new training for data analysts. We will be targeting salaries of around $55,000 for that training program and anticipate training 50 people across 2 cohorts. 9 alumni from the Tech Talent Pipeline Residency Program are either employed full-time or in internships with a average salary of $80,000 and $69,225 respectively. 32 alumni from the CUNY Tech Prep Program have secured full-time jobs with an average salary of $85,808. 13 people who have completed commercial driving training have achieved an average wage of $18.58. 2 out of 8 job seekers who completed cable installation training have an average wage of $17 an hour. So I'm going to read out every single one of these, given you have it in front of you. Skipping to media and entertainment, we had 2 new cohorts in the post-production training program, achieving a wage of $15 per hour. Pre-apprenticeships, 10 out of 30 people have completed trainings in the 3rd quarter. We've launched a new cohort in February, and we're recruiting for the spring cohort. And in March, we awarded a customised training grant of $51,000, with the business contributing $29,000. They plan to train 15 employees in 11 different certifications and expect to offer a 5% wage increase for those people. Happy to take any questions.
Just one quick question. The year-over-year comparisons for 2019 are through March, or 2018 full year, or they're through March of 18?
No, they're through March of 18 as well.
Lucinda, why do you think you're generating fewer job opportunities this year compared to last year? Is that simply a reflection of the new contracts and the transition, or is there something happening in the economy? I mean, it's great that you're filling just as many, if not more, jobs. So just you know, an 8% decline, a pretty big decline, given the economy is still growing. So I was just curious about what's going on there.
It's a good question. We haven't actually done that analysis, but my guess would be that the change in vendor management and just all of the things that they've been grappling with, staffing shortages, issues like that.
So there might have been a dip at the beginning of the fiscal year, and they're now doing better.
Yeah. And we've been tracking the job opportunities pretty tightly over the last few months as we head into the end of the year and need to make sure we've been hitting our targets, and they've been tracking well recently.
For how you guys determine how many people go into a training and how many slots are available, like how does that process? Is that driven by like the jobs that are available or the demand for the training or a combination of the two?
Trainings are typically a cohort of around 25. That's a pretty general standard in terms of a good class number. It does vary a little bit for some specific trainings. And then the number of cohorts, whether or not we put on a training at all, and then the number of cohorts that we put on each year is driven by how much demand we see in the industry.
Okay, for the jobs.
Yeah.
Thank you, Lucinda. All right, we're going to move on, and we will now hear an update on the WIOA Youth Program to Bill Chong, Commissioner of NYC DYCP, and I will turn it over to you, Bill.
Let me start with some good news, as Chris cited. In the adopted budget that was passed last week, which starts on July 1st, DYC's budget will be $954 million. That's a 132% increase from the last year of the Bloomberg administration. So it's been a huge investment across the board by this administration in a cross-section of programs for young people. From workforce programs like the Summer Youth Employment Program, where for the third consecutive year, we'll be serving 75,000 young people this summer. What's exciting about this year's Summer Youth Employment Program is that only the second time in the 56-year history of this program, which started as a federally funded program in 1963, have we made changes. And the changes are really exciting. For the first time, we're working with both the Department of Education and CUNY, and it's something that's been on my bucket list, which is to align what young people learn during the school year with the work experience. So we have, I think, 50 or 60 programs in public high schools, a lot of them career technical education schools. We've set aside jobs for CUNY students so they can pursue employment in a career they've chosen. And so we're really excited because it's taken us 3 years from the time this funding was baseline in 2016, a lot of engagement with stakeholders, with nonprofits, with the city council, but we've reached that point. It's going to be a learning year. The other new change that's worth mentioning is that we're treating younger youth, those that are 14 and 15, differently than older youth, because we know there's very few work experiences that a 14 and 15-year-old can really have. And so we're moving to project-based learning and career exploration for those young people. It's going to be interesting because people are used to just paying minimum wage, but there are, quite frankly, very few meaningful jobs that a 14-year-old can get. And we don't want to send the wrong message that you can get paid minimum wage and not really do a meaningful job. So we'll be happy to report on this summer's findings probably in the fall when we learn a lot more of how this new model, these new models take off.
Do we have any questions?
One quick question, is there any data that ties unemployment or homelessness back to what high school a student attended?
I'm sure someone has that. We don't have a connection. I mean, Department of Home Services may look at that. We do have, for the last 5 or 6 years, we've had programs specifically where jobs are set aside for homeless youth, court-involved youth, and young people in foster care. So our findings have been that the more we can expose these young people to employment, because they don't have these opportunities. So we work with groups like Women in Need, some of our homeless youth programs, we serve young people who are homeless between the ages of 16 and 21. We know that the more interventions we have with young people who may be homeless or court involved, the more likely we'll be able to keep them on a positive path. But I know DOE has been much more focused on young people in temporary housing. So we're starting to work with them. They're sending us young people who get eligible for these jobs, but they would plug into the data because they know precisely which schools have the largest number of young people who are either homeless or in temporary housing. So if you want to, I can connect you to a person there, and then you can follow up with them directly.
Great. Thank you.
Could you talk for a moment about Discover DYCD 2.0?
So another thing on my bucket list, I always think commissioners should have bucket lists because, whether it's 4 years or 8 years, you need to know what you've accomplished when you're at your end of your tenure. So one of the challenges of DYCD is that it's a small agency, but it's the merger of 3 smaller agencies. So if you were lucky or unlucky to get more than one contract with us, you would have to use 9 different data systems. Because a lot depended on the culture of each separate organization, funding sources. So we transitioned last year to a unified data system called DYCD Connect. So John Smith enters one program, we can follow John Smith if he enters another program. And we can see how many multiple interventions John Smith has had over the course of time. The public-facing version of this internal data system is Discover DYC 2.0. We launched an app about 3 years ago, which allowed the public to publicly identify programs we fund in any given neighborhood by category, by zip code, by address. We've now moved towards a universal application. So launching in mid-July, and we're rolling out, we have 46 different programs that we fund. Big ones like the Service Employment Program, small ones like the Fatherhood Program that's funded with anti-poverty funds. So eventually, over the next 18 months, programs will be added into this application, and you can go to one site and apply for every program. We can track, over time, we're able to track waiting lists. So I testified for the City Council in May, and we've never been able to provide information on waiting lists. It's more been left to each individual program. We'll look at waiting lists by individual programs, program areas, geography, all those things, which I'm sure will make OMB very happy. Because now, when I'm put on the spot and said, what's the need, I can actually identify the need.
Thank you very much. We're now very lucky to have with us today Bill Thompson, Deputy Mayor for Strategic Policy Initiatives. Deputy Mayor Thompson's full biography is in section 2 of your board book. But I did want to highlight a few of the diverse initiatives he's responsible for. He oversees the New York City's signature Pre-K for All program, which provides free, high-quality pre-kindergarten for 70,000 4-year-olds each year. He ensures that the continued success of Thrive NYC, the nation's most comprehensive approach to mental health. And he's been charged with expanding the city's investment in minority and women-owned businesses. He also oversees DYCD, SBS, and the Mayor's Office of Workforce Development. So please join me in welcoming Deputy Mayor Bill Thompson.
Hi, I'm not overseeing Thrive. I used to.
I'm sorry.
But I gave away Thrive, and I picked up Department of Consumer Affairs and Worker Protection, which was more closely aligned to some of the other things I'm working on, like workforce, small business. I have women and minority businesses, that program as well, etc. So that's that's one thing. Now, I'd like to, first of all, welcome the new members, and Adria? Adria. I knew her folks way back in the day. Bill, do you remember Frank Negron?
Yes.
Do you know?
Yeah,
Frank Negron is that's my stepfather.
Oh, God, I feel old.
And Mark Elliott, didn't I know you want to pass away? Yeah, so it's nice to see some old familiar faces. Now, the staff, and I've known Lenora since I was a teenager. So the staff asked me to just talk about what I'm thinking about, and so that's what I'll do. I asked, are you sure? So let me say that I think the economy is changing in fundamental ways, and inevitably. And I'll give you three things. One is climate change, and despite sort of our national, we're sort of in like a coma, almost like it's not really happening, or it's not really going to happen. But I spent almost 20 years at MIT, and I sat for 3 years. It was a faculty committee on creating an environmental studies program, because until 5 years ago, MIT did not have an environmental studies program, because the board at MIT was dominated by the Koch brothers. One of our biggest initiatives was the Energy Initiative, funded by Exxon and et cetera. And so there was a lot of pushback against us having an environmental studies program. So the president set up a faculty committee, because at MIT, faculty run the place, basically. It's that kind of a place. It's not like Columbia. Excuse me. Faculty really run it. So I sat for 3 years and heard the scientists and the engineers actually go through the science. And aside from some crazy ideas that engineers had, like, first of all, scientists and engineers don't believe in public policy. They don't understand it. They don't know anything about it. And they literally said, let's put a giant mirror in the sky and deflect the sun. And I was like, you guys couldn't even build a big thing in Boston without the thing falling down. And you think you're going to put a mirror in the sky, But what happened was, all of us came away actually terrified. Because even though the news talks about hurricanes and storms, rising ocean levels, but actually the damage that is being done is just much more extensive than that. And it's happening. And before I took this job, literally when the mayor called me to ask me if I wanted to come back in the city government, I was in the Amazon in Colombia, South America, working with a tribe of Inca people where they had 10 days worth of rain in 10 hours. And it loosened boulders in the hills. And the boulders came in an avalanche and killed 350 people in this one town. And the Inca had been driven there from the rainforest because of drug dealing and fighting that was going on in Colombia. That's why they were in the village. They got wiped out. And so our job, we were asked by the Colombian government to come down and help them figure out where is it safe for people to build. And what we found were there were 360 other communities that were at risk right now for similar kinds of avalanches. And Colombia last year had 1,600 environmentally related disasters in 1 year. So anyway, that's just one place, but the impact is already happening. It's incredible already. And so New York, we're about to lose Indian Point in a few years. That's 20% of our energy. The city council recently passed building mandates for retrofits for buildings over a certain size. my opinion, it doesn't go far enough. I think ultimately, all 900,000 buildings in New York will have to be retrofitted in order for us to save energy. And I've been to other countries, Germany and elsewhere, where they've done this really successfully. But it's going to change the economy. We have over 500 miles of coastline. We're going to have to deal with rising oceans. They're talking about 6 feet plus in this century of ocean level rise. And so when we think about infrastructure spending, retrofitting all these buildings, that alone are jobs for a generation. Are we preparing for that? That is something, I think we need to grapple with as we think about workforce, like what's coming. And it's inevitable. We also have heat islands. Harlem and the Bronx are heat islands. And a lot of people will die of heat, excessive heat, unless measures are taken to deal with that. So, that's coming. A second thing I think that is coming inevitably, and again, having spent almost 20 years in a tech place, you see things that are coming because they're prototyped. You see it like before they become commercialized, and a lot of things don't get commercialized, but a lot of things will get commercialized. So battery cars, battery-driven cars, now the auto companies, all of them are moving to battery cars. But Obama went to MIT twice when he was president, and he went to a lab of, to see some of the people who work on batteries and biochemistry. And in one of the labs, they have a battery where you can drive a car over 1,000 miles. And they've had it since Obama was president. It's been there. That hasn't been commercialized yet because commercialization is a whole different story. But the technology's there. And you could see for a long time, this is coming. The battery cars are coming. Other things are coming. I have a Kenmore washing machine. When it broke, I had a piece that broke. So I had to go to I don't know, you all probably get fancier than Kenmore, but I had to go to Sears. Then they sent a part from China. It was a little plastic part. It cost $40. Now, what I've seen are all the parts in something like a washing machine. They all have little digital codes on them, like barcodes. And you just type in the barcode, and then from the internet, instructions go to a 3D printer, and they print the little plastic part right in front of you for 40 cents, basically. So $40, 40 cents. That's the difference. And, a few years back, these 3D printers were super expensive. Pretty soon, they're going to be in every household. Why? Because the economics are just so powerful in terms of savings and this and that. It's coming. I'll say another word. Before I took this job, I was working with UAW, United Auto Workers, and the Ford Motor Company. Because Ford is investing at a lot of universities now on how to change their whole model for making cars and their whole supply chain and all of that. They're saying, we're not going to make cars halfway around the world and buy super tankers and buy huge parking lots and put cars there and let them sit for a year, a quarter of which never sell. We're going to do just-in-time car manufacturing. And if cars are now batteries, the rest of them just wheels and electrical parts assembly, carbon fiber bodies, that's what they're moving towards. So they were saying, you'll come to a little room, you'll meet with a car designer, and they'll ask you the way a financial counselor asks you, what does a car mean to you? When is your travel? When do you go to the supermarket? Do you take your grandkids? Do you go? They'll ask you all this stuff, and they'll then design a car for you. And it won't look like cars do now. It doesn't have to. It'll just be a battery, assembled parts, and they'll say, oh, today is Tuesday, come back on Friday, your car will be ready. That's where they're moving towards. And UAW is saying, well, if the new auto worker isn't an assembly line worker, but is more like a designer, they're not going to want to be in a union that treats them like the way we do, essentially. They're going to want to own part of this thing they're making. They're going to want to have voice. They're going to be professionals. We have to reinvent ourselves as a union. Maybe we should become a cooperative. Maybe we should, but we clearly can't keep going the way we're going now. So Ford and UAW were in this animated conversation a year and a half ago, I think it's still going on, about what does their future look like, because this was disruptive for both of them. Well, what's true of cars is also true of shoes. You're not going to have shoes made in Taiwan or made in Italy, put in boxes and shipped. You're going to go in a shoe store, they'll laser your foot, and then they'll design a shoe for you, and they'll print it out right there, etc. Right? All of this stuff is coming, and AI also, it's coming. It's gonna change the way we live. This stuff is coming. And for people in technology, they say the first wave of computation was going from mainframes to laptops. The second wave was your smartphone, your smart this and that. They said all of these first two phases pale in comparison to what's coming in terms of digital manufacturing and, and AI. These are blockbuster changes. So some people think we've already seen the digital revolution. No, we actually are at the cusp of it, the beginning of it. It's going to be really transformative in a big way. So that's the second thing. It's coming, and I argue it's inevitable. I just think the economics are too powerful. Third thing is demographics, which in New York City you all know, but a majority of kids entering elementary school now are of color. Black, Latino, Asian, predominantly Black, Latino, predominantly low income. That's a game changer in the United States of America, because what happens to those kids is actually what happens to the economy. If these kids aren't well trained, then, well functioning, not productive, if they aren't, able to go into companies and really, make things happen, guess what happens to old people who are retiring right now? They're in trouble, right? We have a linked fate here. This conversation about specialized schools, to me, is very limited in how people are thinking about it. If Black and Latino kids can't qualify to get into Stuyvesant or another school, that's a crisis for everybody. Because our economy is those kids. And by the way, if government can't invest in these kids, the federal government and so on, if that's not a good investment for our future, we're all in trouble if our kids aren't worth investing in. And so, in terms of the future economy, it's a very basic thing, but it's fundamental. We have to do something what's happening with young people. And, I won't go on and on with that. But a friend of both my sons have startups, 22, 24. They're not interested in government. They think, they're like kids now. Like, they just want to do startups. And one of my 24-year-old's friends went to the University of New Hampshire. She majored in business as an undergrad. She is $220,000 in debt at 22 years old. And she's in psychological counseling because she doesn't know what to do in terms of her future. She'd like to go to business school, whatever, but the idea, she can't even pay her. She works full-time at a fish fry place, and she's getting further and further into debt, working full-time, trying to do a startup. If that's what we're doing to our kids, what's our future look like? And she's not Black. Forget about the Black and Latino. What's our future look like? So demographics is a third thing. These three things, I think, are fundamental, in terms of what's going on in the economy. Now, in terms of the city, my view is that the lowest hanging fruit for us right now is to use our procurement power. We buy $50 billion a year in goods and services if you add up everything. And how do we use our procurement power, both short and long term, to help impact jobs and workforce in positive ways? So one way is in construction. So last week we started putting mandates in our PLAs, project labor agreements with the building trades, they're going to have to have it somewhere, we're negotiating over percentages, but around 30% of new hires will have to come from zip codes that have high levels of poverty, high levels of unemployment, or high levels of non-high school completion. And this is our way of helping the building trades create a new future for themselves, because their members tend to be 58 years old and white guys, and that's not their future, because their kids don't want to become carpenters and plumbers, and they need new pipelines. But also, we think this will create 10,000 jobs a year, or opportunities in the construction trades and skilled trades for young people from our lowest income zip codes. That's something we're doing with our procurement power, and the building trades are on board, by the way, because they see the New York City building trades, because they see this as their fate. I mean, they want to, be in front of this, be on board, and I must say that's been positive, and a lot of people are surprised when I say the building trades embrace this. They do. Another thing we're doing, we have a home care. We don't call it working group. I forget what we call it. Some kind of
Community.
What is it?
The LTC learning community.
The learning community. We didn't want to raise expectations. But the biggest job category in New York City now, and the biggest to come, the biggest growth category is in long-term care. And that's because 1 in 20 New Yorkers are going to age out, are aging out. 80 million New Yorkers, 80 million Americans are the baby boomer generation. 80 million are going to retire in the next 10 years or so. 10,000 people a day retire in America. In New York City, it's the same. So 1 in 5 New Yorkers will be elderly in need of care. The home care model right now is broken. Home care jobs don't pay well. BMCC stopped providing home care training because they say it's unethical to train people for jobs that pay so little. And aside from, there are some really great organizations like Adria's in the Bronx, great organization, but the Medicaid is really trying to force the industry into the lowest, they're trying to cut it further, so there's less opportunity to train people. And what that means is bad care for either you or your mother or your grandmother, or your grandparents, because workers who aren't trained well, who aren't paid well, can't provide great service. And right now we need a new way of thinking about it, and a different kind of model. But any way we go, this is going to be big. So telemedicine, cluster care, which is geographic care, where you have a home care worker who serves people in their block or in their building, and you think about it geographically. New ways to use telemedicine. That means the workers have to be trained on how to use computers and all of that. There's a lot of, and they have to be remunerated to get the training and incentivized and all of it. So we're working on that because construction, given climate change, home care, given the aging out of the pop, these are two real fundamental things. We know that now. We're also, the city's the biggest employer, so believe it or not, CUNY doesn't train for our civil service exam. And so we're doing things like getting more coordinated with CUNY, with DOE, DYCD, so our summer programs are linked towards careers. CUNY and DOE are preparing people for jobs that the city offers now, or that we know where there's going to be work there. And I call those things the low-hanging fruit. Things we know is going to happen, we know we need to be prepared for, we know there are going to be jobs there, so how do we get our young folks really into those jobs? I'd like to encourage both cities, companies, the CUNY companies, other universities, to do more economic planning, and I'd like us to do it together. So it's related to workforce. And by that I mean, if we have to insulate 900,000 buildings, imagine how much insulation that is. And right now, insulation is really bad. And what does green installation look like? That's renewable. So that's something where we need science, green material science. What are the materials that can actually insulate well, that are renewable? There's going to be an immense demand for that. And New York is a leader in getting in front of that. So why aren't we seeding those kinds of companies now, or seeding that kind of research now? If our universities are doing that kind of research, companies that are interested in that kind of manufacturing will want to be in New York, and those are jobs. And same goes for building monitoring systems. I often talk about the $70,000 a year janitor, maybe $80,000 a year janitor. This is for you, Lenore. So some of my former students have companies, and one of them, they just retrofitted Harvard University and for energy. And so the retrofitting means, you have solar on the roof, you might have geothermal or cogeneration plants. If you don't know these terms, cogen plants make energy, and then the heat from the turbines makes steam. That's heat. You run it through a condenser that makes air conditioning. Geothermal puts water 15 feet at least under the ground where it's 55 degrees year-round. So they cool it in the summer and heat it in the winter and blah, blah, blah. And then they have sensors that move hot air from the sunny side of the building to the cool side in the winter, vice versa in the summer. All these systems have to talk to each other. And they do that through a computer, through a software program. And the janitor who knows how to run these systems, every building, this size building, will save $250,000 a year if they can retrofit, up to standards. So if you have a janitor that can run the system, you'll pay them $70,000, $80,000 a year because it's saving you a ton of money. However, right now, Johnson Controls has one system, Siemens has another system, General Electric has another system. If you buy one of these systems and it breaks down, it takes like 4 months to get someone to come fix it. Why? Because everyone is training to a different standard, and you got to find a repair person who knows exactly your kind of system, and you have backlogs that to develop. What the city should do, what I'm pushing the city to do, is since we're a big, big consumer and we are insulating so many buildings, if we set a protocol on what standards should be for the software for building monitoring system, all the other folks are going to build to our standard because we're so big, right? And then the training, we can have generic training, and workers who are trained on how to monitor these systems, they can go into any building, because right now it's as if you go to plug a device in the wall, and every single building has a different device to plug into the wall. That's what it's like now, right? So, but we can change that if we plan ahead and etc. And be strategic. So that's the kind of thing I'm talking about with economic planning. How do we take things we know are going to happen, telemedicine, we know that's coming. How do we actually get in front of that, use the city's procurement power, use our universities, etc., make New York a dynamic, exciting place, and then have our training linked to that. Jobs that are preparing kids for what's coming in the future. How do we do that? Now, last thing I'll say along those lines is AI, artificial intelligence. We say we're training kids now for a digital economy because we're teaching them coding. Wrong. It depends on how we're training them. So the way I explain it, when I went to elementary school and even college, they taught math by rote. Memorize this, 1 + 1 = 2, 2 + 2 = 4. Do your memorization tables, etc. However, if you're adding heat to water, the linear model, 1 + 1 = 2, 2 + 2. The linear model only works if you're talking about 32 degrees to 212 degrees, if you're adding heat to water. Then you add 1 degree of heat to 32 degrees, you have 33 degrees. Another degree, 34 degrees. You keep doing that, but you hit 212 degrees, you add 1 more degree of heat, boom, your water's gone. Or you go below 32, subtract 1, boom, your water's gone. You have ice, or you have gas, right, in the other end. So critical, people who learn how to program AI versus people whose jobs are going to be displaced by AI are people who know how to ask critical questions. Because all the linear stuff is going to be done by artificial intelligence, basically. All the 1 + 1 = 2, that all can be done automatically, programmed. The critical question is, what elements are we talking about if we're writing a program for, adding heat to another substance? Someone needs to know, the worker needs to know, are we talking about helium? Are we talking about water? We've got to know the substance, but you got to know to ask that question. The people who know how to ask these questions are the programmers of AI. The people who don't know how to ask those questions are the ones whose jobs are in jeopardy. And that's just an example But I've been talking to DOE about that. I've been talking to CUNY about that. How do we begin to inject critical thinking into our training models? Because workers will need that. Also, unlike when my grandfather worked, he worked in a factory 30 years, he retired, literally got a gold watch. Jobs of the future, nobody, my kids, they don't even think, they think in terms of months or a year in terms of jobs. They don't think like 10 years, 20 years. People's jobs are going to be like in flux. So learning how to learn, which is another aspect of critical thinking, is really vital. And life planning is really vital for people. So how do we inject that into our workforce concepts? So people know like how to think about health insurance, retirement, upgrading and training, what goes, they're going to be cycling in and out of jobs. How do you do that? How do you relearn a new job quickly? And all of that stuff has to somehow get built into, our training programs, because that's the economy that's coming, and in many ways it's already here. So how do we do that? So, couple last things. All of this to me points to a potentially bright economic future, with lots of green jobs, lots of tech jobs, new kinds of AI jobs, new kinds of healthcare jobs, lots of good jobs. However, people are going to have to fight for it. It's not going to happen automatically. I think this idea that the private sector creates the economy and you just let companies do what they do and Wall Street do what it does and it makes life great for everybody, it's been a failure completely. We've seen that in the last 30 years of economic stagnation, lack of real growth. Great wealth at the top, and New York City benefits more than most cities from that because we have a lot of those people here. But I grew up in Pennsylvania. I got to tell you, you go to Bethlehem, PA, you go, the places where I grew up, it's devastating. Like, I drove across northern Wisconsin, northern Michigan, because I like to fish. I went to the borderland between Minnesota and Canada. Canada we look like the second world country, and Canada looked like the first world country. Driving across those old industrial, it's devastating what's happened in the economy. I think that I go back to the original American dream, which was a participatory, property-holding society. That was the dream. So I call it economic democracy. But Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, they all believed that every citizen in the US either ought to own property, or if they were in a company, they ought to own part of that company. They believed that when workers went to work every day, they, at work, would learn how to have a conversation, do planning for the farm or for the company, how to set aside money for the future, how to make investments, how to take responsibility for decisions you make at the job and live with it, how to do all of that. And they said without citizens learning those things, in their jobs day to day, when they go to vote at the voting booth, they won't actually exercise good judgment. So they said you can't have a really robust political democracy unless your economy also is a day-to-day economic training ground. You need that. Now, Jefferson realized that meant he can't support slavery. And he was a slave owner, and he said, I realized that slavery is incompatible with democracy. A majority, Kosciuszko, the person the bridge is named after, the Polish democratic revolutionary, was very forceful in fighting slavery and saying we have to create a democracy on a whole new basis in society, etc. They got beat back by the predominant number of slave owners who were amongst the founding fathers, and they said, we're not going to, slavery is our main business, and we're not, cotton and other stuff, we're not going to get rid of that for some principle called democracy. So we struggled. And then there was a Civil War. And during the Civil War, the 13th Amendment, which in today's eyes we see it as just eliminating chattel slavery, African slaves, black slaves. Actually, the 13th Amendment outlawed what's called involuntary servitude. Involuntary servitude in 1863 meant what they then called wage slavery, They used that term. And by that they said, if a person has to go work for another person because they have no other means of survival, that is wage slavery. And instead of that, there ought to be 40 acres allotted to every former slave or poor white person in America. 40 acres and a mule, was called. And they put that into the Constitution and voted on that. The Civil War was really about restoring this notion of economic democracy to all Americans and rebuilding the nation on a new economic basis. That got beat back with the restoration of the former Confederates, the violent overthrow of Reconstruction in the South, the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. That was violently overthrown. Then there was a movement in America called the populist movement. Poor whites and blacks coming together, fighting again, for the same thing, for this American dream. And they took over the legislature in North Carolina, took over the legislature in Georgia, ran a candidate for president in 1896, caused turmoil amongst the barons of the time, the wealthy folks. That is when racial segregation was instituted, Plessy versus Ferguson, actually to break apart the populist movement. That's why that happened. And then literally, by force, the federal government said, poor whites and blacks can't talk to each other, can't live together, we're going to separate them entirely. And in 1954, when the NAACP wrote the amicus brief in Brown versus Board of Ed to integrate schools, they talked about the break apart of the populist movement. And the NAACP said in 1954, the whole reason we have racial segregation is to prevent a populist movement from reemerging. Poor whites and blacks coming together, fighting for a different kind of economy. In 1961, when Martin Luther King went to the AFL-CIO, he said, I will end the civil rights movement and bring 40 million black people into the labor movement. We don't need two movements fighting for the same thing. All I need you labor to do is desegregate unions. And only 4 of 72 unions supported King. That was his original I Have a Dream speech, which went all the way back to Jefferson and Lincoln, etc. You know, so this, when Hubert Humphrey, who was to the left of AOC, by the way. You know, we've moved so far to the right as a country, we kind of like forget. Hubert Humphrey got together with the Congressional Black Caucus and introduced a bill calling making it the federal government would guarantee a job for every American citizen in America. That was the Humphrey-Hawkins bill. And it was on these same principles. And this was in the early 70s. And that got beat back by the ascent of later Reaganism and others, you know, that got beat back. So I just walked through all this to say, I think we can have a robust economy, but I think it has to be on different principles. I think it's really important that we start having a variety of different kinds of economic businesses or firms, including employee-owned firms, worker-owned firms. Amazon has 250,000 robots now in their warehouses. Amazon is introducing robots to stock shelves. If you have an investor-owned company, the incentive is to lay off workers and put in robots all the time. If you have an employee-owned company, they may introduce robots, but they may give themselves time off to go back to school, learn new skills, or time to spend with their families, or whatever. But they won't lay themselves off. You know, they won't displace themselves. And when workers make money, there's more demand in the economy does better. So it's not a contradiction between democracy and actually having a thriving market economy. There's not a contradiction. Actually, real democracy helps the economy. And so I think if we fight for these things, we can actually have a really robust and diverse kinds of economy. And New York is the right place to do it. So I've been talking to my team and staff about that. And the idea being, we got to have some idea of what we're fighting for. We got to have some idea of like where the future is headed. We got to see what role the government can play in helping shape a future. I think we have to move to a more cooperative economy instead of trying to see everybody as fighting everybody else. You know, so business is opposed to labor and community is left out of the picture altogether, etc. I think we can construct new kinds of relationships that are win-win, but we got to fight for it.
student in one of your classes. I'm going to try to keep this to just maybe like 2 minutes. Diallo Shabazz from DC 37. We've recently designed and are launching a green job training program for public sector employees. We have 125,000 members in New York City. It's almost a third of New York City's government workforce. And Henry Garrido, our executive director, was with the mayor at the press conference when he launched the new dirty buildings legislation. So we're serious about this. We know that among our members, we've identified the locals and the job titles that need green job training. And so the infrastructure that you're talking about for New York City, someone has to design it, someone has to maintain it, someone has to audit and regulate it, and a lot of that will be our members. The Green Workforce Training Program that we've designed, in collaboration also right now with some city agencies who've been sending letters of support to us. It's an NABCEP certification for renewable energy, energy efficiency and retrofits for buildings. Even some of the data reporting systems, we'll be talking to DoIT about retraining some city IT workers so they understand how some of these new sustainability systems work. We need to work more closely with the city in designing these workforce training strategies. We've applied for some grants and we got some support letters. For a long time, DC 37 has taken, has kind of led the charge in funding this. This is not an appeal for funding, but more and more collaborative conversation. There are some city agencies that I think need political cover from City Hall to even talk to us and work with us on this. But we're basically offering to pay for the training for city employees, for architects and engineers, for IT workers across multiple agencies, even parks employees. The administrative staff are going to be managing the auditing processes, the regulatory frameworks. We need to work more closely on this. That's the first thing. And so we're looking forward to working with the city on this. The second thing is the automation piece, inspiring and terrifying. We've been developing an artificial intelligence index of all 1,000 job titles that DC 37 has, to think about which ones are going to be disrupted by AI and automation. That's as far as we've gotten so far. We know which ones are going to be disrupted, some of the reasons they'll be disrupted. We haven't figured out what to do next. Which job titles are going to go away completely, so people need to be retrained to do something else. Which are going to be situations where you have 50 people working in an office, whether they're accountants or paralegals. Now because of automation, you have 10% of those folks, and how do you train them to work along with the technology that's going to be there? So you have some people that are managing technology, and some people are being managed by the technology. So this is a collaborative conversation from a workforce strategy standpoint that we need to have as well. But very much inspired by what you said, and looking forward to working with you in the city to make this happen.
That's great. So number one, I'm excited to hear about your Green Job initiative, work training initiative. So we'll follow up on that, because I'll provide cover for our agencies, and I'd love to collaborate with you on that. And also 32BJ, if you guys are interested in that. Folks I think it'd be great. We should be working together on these issues. Exciting. The building trades, by the way, formed a couple of years ago, it's called Climate, Jobs, and Justice Initiative in New York State. And so they have an executive director, and they've been working on this as well. So it'd be nice to have us all working together. And I tease the trades. The justice part is new for them, but for you all, it's not. And it'd be nice to have everyone working together. On the second part about AI, when Amazon was coming, when we thought Amazon was coming, actually circulated a reading list. A study group, started a study group for staff at City Hall, and the Urban League asked for it, so I gave it to them. And basically I was saying we need to study Amazon's business model. So Amazon is losing money on personal deliveries to people's houses individually. But it's great for branding and all of that, so they do it, but it's not a moneymaker for them. What they are moving towards is actually providing goods for entire cities or entire city agencies. So they tried to get the New York Greater Hospital Association, New York Greater Hospital Association, to just buy from Amazon hospitals. So you need gloves or whatever, you just go on their platform. That's a money maker. They approach 5 city agencies to say, can we be your purchasing arm for your entire agency? Because that makes money. You're not having to go door to door. That makes money. So understand, we have that leverage. We need to understand that, because folks just talked about Amazon like a real estate deal. Less than 15% of their business is physical anything. you know? So we need to like learn their business model. The other thing they do is sell people's data. And that's the big thing. 97% of Facebook's profits last year were selling people's data. Workers and community folks give away their data for free. There's no collective bargaining over data. But all of these companies, Visa, MasterCard, the banks, they all have data on, if you use a card to buy something, they can tell you what you bought, where you bought it, you know, geographically where you bought it, when you bought it. That data is out there. Why aren't we training folks to collectively bargain over cable service, diaper purchases, phone service? Because when you do, we did an experiment with NYCHA residents 13 years ago. The cable companies 13 years ago offered $32 million a year to the NYCHA residents every year if they would do one cable contract versus them having to market to 200,000 households. So in my view, and there are some unions like in LA that are going down this road, in my view, if we start organizing people together around first of all, utilizing big data, organizing them, extending collective bargaining from the workplace to consumer purchases. That's how you get at Apple. They move production of phones away so you can't unionize where they manufacture. You sure can hit them where they sell. And the same goes for Amazon. You can hit these platform companies who sell data. You can force disclosure. You can negotiate. If you're going to sell our information, then let's talk about the revenue split. Out of that, I think we can have robust funding for a lot of things that we're constrained for now, including workforce training, other kinds of things, because there's big money there. The money is just completely flying out of people's hands because people haven't really figured out, meaning us, how to actually capture money in the new economy, like in these platform companies. So I was setting up study groups. I couldn't wait for Amazon to come. Because I was like, we're going to really show what it means for a city to negotiate with a tech job. We're really going to and I think I'd love to work with you on exploring like how we do that. Because I think there are great opportunities. Because New York has big organizations that around a strategy like that could immediately have impact. Yes.
Good morning, and thanks for being here. This has been great. So I'm Scott Berger, my company is Arista. So we are a union HVAC contractor.
Oh,
and we have not seen a demand for sustainable and energy efficient solutions. And I think at the core of that, the challenge is that both the city, the state, the federal government, too often they're incentivizing the landlords to do things that are more efficient or more sustainable. And the problem is it's the tenants that are sub-metered and paying the electric bills. So the landlords don't have a lot of incentive to then invest in those things. And I think if we can kind of align that in a better way, I think we will see more demand come through and thereby more jobs. The economy shifting that way.
Well, I couldn't agree more. Several years ago, I started an initiative in the Bronx with BCDI, Bronx Community Development Initiative, and Northwest Bronx Community and Clergy United. And it was an idea that came from Montefiore. And Montefiore said, we have a whole bunch, our number one problem in our ER is actually asthma. And we have a lot of people who are coming repeatedly back. And we suspect they may be coming from the same buildings. So they gave us their asthma data, and we actually identified there were 50 buildings in which the vast majority of their cases were coming from. And we call those sick buildings. And we said, well, look, if we're going to retrofit buildings for asthma, and a lot of it is like mold, a lot of it is actually rodents, but if we're going to retrofit a building and tear up walls for asthma, why don't we do energy efficiency at the same time? And actually, over time, that can help pay for the cost of the asthma retrofit. And they said, great idea. And then we started going to buildings and encountered exactly the problem you talked about. So we actually had to get the landlords to sign covenants not to use it as an MCI, an excuse to raise rents and get out of rent stabilization. We had to get the tenants really understanding. So Northwest Bronx is a tenant organizing group. So we actually hired them to organize the tenants. So now there have been like 5 buildings done. it's moving, and so we're starting an internal working group on how to spread the model, because it was a nightmare. We had to get 5 city and state agencies, we had to get landlords and tenants, and then the savings go back to the hospital, but the hospital doesn't share the savings. And so we have to get the hospital to put money back in when they save money. So it's a really different kind of model, but it makes all the sense in the world. And we make these announcements like, yeah, people are going to retrofit, and this is what I was saying about economic planning. But then we don't plan. And this stuff doesn't happen automatically, and everybody figures everything out. That's this like laissez-faire illusion dream we live in. It's not real life. So I went to Germany. I was blown away, frankly. Like, the German government set up an agency to promote energy efficiency. They have data. So now, if you go to a bank and say, I want to retrofit my building, I want to put a cogen plan in. Well, cogen is in the small business department, but the building's in the real estate department, and they don't have any data to evaluate all these retrofits you want to make and what pays what, so they don't know what to do with you. In Germany, they collect data. If you punch in an address, they know how much sunlight the building gets, they know what kind of skin the building has, they know what kind, if you put in this kind of HVAC, this kind of boiler, they know. It's all there, and then the government gives that to the banks. So all the bank officer has to do is plug in the address, and they get like, yes, no. We don't do that. And so HVAC and all those other businesses in Germany are thriving, right? They've created a lot more jobs, etc. So that's kind of what I'm pushing for. And it takes having people like you. We all need to be engaged in a process in order to actually do that kind of thing. You got to have people who know what they're talking about. Does that make any sense? Because my staff, they looked at me for months like with blank looks on their faces, like.
You're in the right direction.
Thanks. Yeah.
Hey, Phil. Nice
Hi,
to see you.
Lenore.
At 32BJ, we do have for a long time, many years, a green building program, mostly focused in the residential sector.
Yeah.
We have green cleaning in the commercial office building. And we also are part of the Climate Jobs New York project with the building trades and some other unions, transport workers, nurses, some other unions. And one of the things fascinating to hear about, and I think it's a really good idea, the use of procurement. That was one of the things that the Climate Jobs Project did, was set labor standards that were part of NYSERDA, the state energy department procurement of renewable energy. So requiring the developers of offshore wind to build and operate under project labor agreement or have meet the labor standards. So that'd be something really interesting to look at for the city. Similar type of things to say what kinds of labor standards could be incorporated through procurement efforts that the city is making, and is the city looking to not only purchasing renewable energy, but also all the other ways that the procurement power of the city could drive a high road economic view and create good jobs. And I wanted to add one thing to your list and share a little story about the cost of healthcare. And for those of us in the labor movement and others, training is important, but if the quality of the job that you're training people for is not a good job, or that healthcare is unaffordable, people still can be forced into horrible, horrible situations or conditions. I sit on our union's benefit fund appeal, so people have an issue with their benefits, and we have really good health insurance that includes prescription coverage. But there's a list of medicine that's covered by our plan and a list of medicines that's not. And a young man came with his parents and was appealing the decision of our benefit funds to pay for the entire cost of the medicine he needed for epilepsy. And he, in order to work, he had to be seizure-free. The medicine cost $6,000 for a 90-day supply, and because there were generics available, our plan covered the generics but not the brand. The generics weren't working for him. He had a doctor's certain note and all of that stuff. And the plan paid $1,000, and he and his family had to pay $4,500. It was heartbreaking. And reality of the healthcare system that we live under, the cost of healthcare and the cost of prescription medicine is a huge contributor to bad health outcomes for people, poverty for people, bankruptcy, homelessness, and lots of other problems. And, you know, tackling that issue as part of creating a healthy and thriving community is important. Interested in your thoughts on the role the city could play in dealing with that. Understanding that it's a national or global problem, but again, the city as a purchaser, whether it's promoting purchasing cooperatives or a different way of engaging the for-profit pharmaceutical and healthcare industry.
So, you're right. I mean, obviously, this is a huge federal issue. My family still lives in Massachusetts, and we go to New Hampshire a lot. And folks in New Hampshire have really been out of shape because Canada's right across the border, and Canadians pay a fraction of what we pay for the exact same drugs. And they just see it every day, and they work with Canadians, and it's like, why do we have to pay? And of course, as you know, Obama cut a deal with the pharmaceutical industry, which left them harmless, so he could get the Affordable Care Act through, and they didn't lobby against it. And so we overpay for pharmaceuticals about 80%. We overpay. Because the federal government prohibits Medicaid and Medicare from bargaining for the cheapest price for pharmaceuticals. It's an anti-market, provision built into our federal policy. Last year, Medicaid recipients in New York, 700,000 of them didn't fill their prescriptions because they couldn't afford it. And so what it means is we all pay a big price for that, because when people don't take their medicine, they end up in the emergency room. And our Medicaid state budget now is $82 billion a year or something. It's astronomical because we don't actually do enough on the front end, which is to your issue. So one of the things that I just talked to Metro Plus about yesterday, and I'd love to talk to you about, is getting all the healthcare plans, like the major unions and Metro Plus together, and saying, why don't we bargain collectively against the pharmaceuticals? Because New York is huge. If we all work together, we'd be at well over 1 million. We'd be in the millions. They have to respond to that. And I think that's, the mayor's interested in that, but there's been very little work on that. But we're just beginning to walk down that road. I think we have to.
I mean, and for employers, it's incredible, for employers who want healthcare, especially smaller employers, it's unaffordable. And so it's an issue for employers as well as for,
Here's another idea.
For unions.
Here's another idea. The nonprofits that employ hundreds of thousands of workers in New York pay a lot more for healthcare than you do for your members, or for what DC 37 does for their members, or what 1199 does for their members. Why not open your plans to them? Which I think would open them up to unionizing, by the way, FYI. And why not, if you all work together, if 32BJ 1199, DC 37 walked into Albany, locked in arms with the nonprofit, school teachers and health providers, etc., I think it'd be a whole new day in Albany when it comes to these issues. So I think those kinds of conversations will be game changers if we could make that happen. In New York, I haven't been here for 25 years, so what is shocking to me is everybody, including my own staff, when there's a problem, they say, let's go to OMB and ask for money. And I'm used to being in places where that wasn't an option. You couldn't go, I work in Haiti, man, or Colombia. You can't go to, let's go to government and ask for money. No. Or even in Boston, you can't do that. Everybody's broke. And so I think the city can't fund everything, particularly these things. But I think we have a lot of powerful actors, and if we all work together, we can actually make big changes in how we procure, both state and city, etc. How Medicaid works in terms of how home care works, etc.
I'll just say, I'm also on the benefit fund, but for $11.99, I'm an employer trustee, and $11.99 is actually doing exactly what you're talking about in terms of reaching out to community-based organizations and bringing them into the fund. So we're watching, this is the first year, so we're watching to see how it plays out.
Will you please update me on that?
Yes.
Because I was about to go have a meeting with George Gresham, and I was gonna like be all mad and argue, you know?
But I do think the next piece that you talked about connecting all of the unions, is one of the things that we've been talking. We actually had a conversation with Amy Peterson 2 weeks ago, about how do unionized organizations and co-ops work together to provide services to each other. And look at what kinds of benefits are in the collective bargaining agreements, where there are opportunities for, say, a home care company to provide long-term care services to union members, and just sort of having that supply chain where we're working with each other and using each other.
So that's great to hear. And just so you know, like I've been working my word is ecosystem. Like how do we have a different kind of ecosystem when it comes to a bunch of different issues like this? So recently, a few weeks ago, Lee Saunders, Mary Kay Henry, the Ford Foundation, the Open Society Foundation, which is Soros, NEA, the president of NEA, there were some other unions, they all met to talk about their pension funds. Or in the case of the foundations, their Wall Street investments. How do they actually better align those with the needs of their members? So not that just you get your 7% return, but your money is actually doing good things, things you want them to do, while you're earning that 7% return. So that's the conversation. And we're talking about maybe using New York as a testing ground to try out some new strategies on that, because frankly, unions could build affordable housing for its members. Co-op City was entirely built that way. But the infrastructure to do that, there used to be a union nonprofit that just did that. I've been talking to HIPIT, which is the Building Trades Pension Funds, about coming into New York and being on that page to begin to just start exercising that muscle and that leverage to start doing things more collaboratively and solving problems for members. Because I think unions could actually make more for their members in monthly income by building affordable housing than they can negotiating at the bargaining table, actually. And when you have a lot of money, you can take a poor neighborhood in Yonkers or anywhere in the city, or take NYCHA, you can turn it into a different place. Because you can do scale, you can do place making. So how do we, that's the conversation that they're having, and I'm excited about that. Because I think labor, labor either steps up and reinvents itself or it becomes extinct. And so there's more energy now, I think, for these conversations than there ever has been, which is good.
Okay. Really want to thank you for coming today. It's been a pleasure, so thank you.
Thank you. Good to see you.
See you.
How are you? All right, good.
Okay. Just a couple notes about our next meeting. It will take place on September 17th, and it will not be here. SPS and NYC EDC are moving to a different location in Lower Manhattan, and so before the 17th of September, Chris will let us know exactly where we're going. I don't think it's clear, right?
It's One Liberty Plaza.
Oh, you
We
got
know
that.
the building, we just don't know if we have a conference room available to us yet. So that's been set up.
That's it for today. Do I have a motion to adjourn today's meeting? Motion. Second. All in favor? Aye.